Yeah, he's got to get me. All right. Hey, it is so good to see you all here tonight. And honestly, I'm just really excited about this. I mean, as somebody who is going through, has been through, the death of my mother and then the death of my father-in-law and just everything that goes around with that we're going to be talking about tonight. I was just really, really excited when I was approached by Converge North Central telling us we have this grant from the Lilly Endowment that we can offer free of charge an experience of a seminar that's been going on for about 15 years educating people on this. So this is not just these are not fly-by-night guys. They have been thoroughly vetted by a lot of us. And Terry and I have met, with Chris here, and I just want to introduce Chris. Give a welcome to Chris, Chris Anderson. Really have appreciated the friendship. This is Jeff over here. And
thank you.
The Jeff
That's right. That's right.
And we have Jake over here who will be sharing a little bit. Thank them for appreciate it. You'll get more applause at the end.
You got to work your way up.
I'm so excited that the information that they're going to be sharing is going to get passed on. It was something that Terry and I found really helpful. A lot of people that we have talked to that have been through this have found this very, very helpful. And just understanding things that we don't deal with every day. The problem is we don't deal with this every day, right? And so knowing what's important and what's not, and what are the questions to ask, and what's even on the table when we talk about wills. I'd like to offer a word of prayer, and then I'm just going to turn it over to these guys to get going. Sounds good. All right, Lord Jesus, I just thank you so much, Lord, that you have people everywhere. You have this group of guys who understand this whole topic of wills and trusts and the legal and the financial and everything that's involved with this. And Lord, I just thank you for their willingness to share that and to educate us and to help us understand better what the reality is and how to better deal with our realities, Lord, and so that nobody inherits a mess, Lord. I just pray that what comes out of here is, Lord, that we are all wiser and more organized in the way that we approach our wills, our trusts, and especially those moments of life. So I just thank you so much, Lord, and just thank you for your presence here with us. I pray Jesus in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Ben.
Thanks, Pastor.
How are we doing for the mic? Are we okay?
All righty.
There you go.
Still intermittent, or are we still going okay?
I'm always on, and so it's just.
Normally, thoughts like that might hurt my feelings, but Jeff, I don't care about your opinion.
Come on.
We're going to do a quick, make sure we're all mic'd up.
Well, normally people don't clap for us before the presentation, so that was kind of a nice change. But thank you, Pastor, for having us. Chris will say a little more when he gets remiked here, but Converge deserves the credit for tonight, and Pastor Ben does for bringing us in. We appreciate the opportunity to share this information with you. We've been doing it quite a while. Chris and I have known each other for about 30 years. Our children went to school together, and we've gone through a couple of life's storms together, very similar background, Chris and myself, with our own families. And it's really a blessing to be able to do this with my good friend here and partner in the business and colleague now for many years. So I'll let you, if you're back on, maybe talk a little more about Converge and what's going on.
I think we mentioned the Lilly Grant, and so the class being called Who Will Inherit the Mess, it gets people's attention because there's so much misinformation out there about the difference between a will and a trust and what it does. So we have about 40 minutes of content. And so we're excited to deliver it because it seems like no matter the number of people in the room and the thousands of times that we've done this, that there's usually 2 or 3 ahas that everybody in the room has. And as an example, maybe just a way to get started, I asked a few of you in the audience, how many people have a will? Be okay, just we look around and see hands?
A traditional
About
will.
half the room, that would be really normal. And with that will, is there anybody that has one that's older than 10 years old? Okay, 10, how about 15? Keep hands up. There's a 15, Dave. Anybody have a will older than 15 years? How old is your will, sir? Because I think you're gonna win. It's over 50 years old. Wow, there's a Snicker bar later for the oldest will.
Yeah.
And you just won it. That's the oldest one that I've seen, I think, in the last year.
Yeah.
Dave, it's good to, 41 years for your will.
That's-
Dave and Heidi are here too, and I know they attend your church, and we've had a chance to work with them in the past too, so I'm just glad to see some familiar faces too. Pastor, we made a commitment early on, and it's true for all of you. This is an educational event only. We're going to be talking about some interesting stuff, and there's an opportunity for you to ask questions tonight and certainly some follow-up. But our goal is just to do a good job and probably get from 50,000 feet down to about 5,000 feet of information. We'll think you'll find it pretty helpful. So with that, why don't we get started, Jeff?
That sounds good. I'm trying to advance. There we go. So as Chris just said, our goal tonight, our commitment to Pastor, to Converge North Central, and to all of you is it's just information tonight. We want you to learn. Our heart is to share the information. We're not here to push or prod for anyone to do anything other than to learn. We always have to say also, our disclaimer is this is not legal, finance, or tax advice. But you know what we're going to talk about for the next hour? Legal, finance, and tax. Because that is the Bermuda Triangle of estate planning. I kid you not. The problems usually lie in one of those 3 circles, or all of them share the blame. So we're going to learn a lot about that, how important this is. In other words, the attorney can't do it all. They're a good start, and so we'll learn a little more about that. We always have a 2-part approach to our education. This is a public part 1. We get to have a little fun as a group together, and we want you to ask questions, and feel free to raise your hand if you're thinking about something. We don't have to wait till the end. We have time built in for that. And then you'll see we offer a private part 2, and that's an extension of tonight. That is, if you as an individual or if you as a family wanted to take what you learned tonight a little bit further, we could meet for a cup of coffee, you could come to the office, we could do a phone call or a Teams visit, whatever you want to do, and just know that's a one-on-one with you where we can get specific on your situation. So that's, we'll talk a little more about that little review as we go on.
It is interesting, though, when you were raising your hand, is there some people that don't have documents, too? That would be pretty common as well. There's some people that don't have documents. Is there some that might have a revocable trust, too? I bet there's a handful of those. Okay, so, I mean, that just really bears out with the law of large numbers. Usually about 10 or 15% have some type of trust. Most have a will if they have something, or they don't have any documents at all. So we're going to cover those 3 situations pretty thoroughly and probably give you some interesting and fun insight for it. So why don't we go ahead and get started with a little bit of house cleaning, Jeff?
Well, we'll knock out the handouts real quick. There's some folders on your seat, and the folders are 1 per couple. Or if you're here alone, it's 1 obviously per individual. And these are just kind of the 4 items that are in our handout tonight. We call this our yellow card. Looks like that. We've got a, this is just for you to fill out some information. And if you need a folder, we do have some extras. Either Jake up here or Pastor will pass them out if anyone still needs one. But this is the only one we would like back from you tonight. You can put your name and number on here. We'll connect with you if you want. You can give us an idea of how, are you ready, or we're just here to learn. Sometimes that's helpful because we don't want to, jump down a rabbit hole here if someone's not ready. So you can give us a little idea. Maybe you want us to send you some information. So this one you can fill out, and we have a tray that you might have seen right outside the door there, and you can drop this right there on your way out. So this is the only one we want back. We call it our yellow card.
We do want to make sure that people know there is no mailing list, there's no drip at anything. It's just our way of communicating with you if you want some of the follow-up time. You'll probably hear about a couple of documents too that are referred to up here. If you write those down, we'll also just email those to you. There's a few of them that you're going to find interesting maybe to get off of the Attorney General's website that we might point to as well.
Yeah, some people want a copy of the slide or this or that, and we're happy to send any of that. Our heart is to educate. And then, of course, we use that for follow-up appointments if needed. So the next handout in there, you'll see an example of one of the attorneys that our team works with. Chris and I are not the attorneys, neither is Jake. But isn't that interesting? Here we are talking about estate planning, and we're not the lawyers. And that's by design, to be honest with you. We do need lawyers to do part of the work, and this is just an example of one of the estate planning law firms our team works with. So they're not jacks of all trades. In fact, Matthew Tram attends, doesn't he attend
Bethlehem Baptist.
downtown, I think. We found that out about him after we hooked our wagon to him. But so we've got 4 different law firms that we work with that do all the drafting and all of the heavy-duty legal stuff, and then we're kind of filling in all the gaps.
Jake, can I add too? How is it that Jake and Jeff get mixed up so easily after this many
we're
years
both
too?
awesome. That's why. And so,
I do want to remind folks, when we're thinking about attorneys, I'll just use mine as an example. It's been a few years, but I fell on the ice. And when I was horizontal, I hit the running board on the backside of my shoulder, and I tore my bicep completely and my rotator cuff and 2 bones in my shoulder. And I didn't go to the practicing general practicing doctor that I have. Matter of fact, Jan Anderson, who's the wife of John Anderson, the baseball coach down at the U of M, kind of famous, I called to find out who is the orthopedic surgeon for the pitchers for the Gophers, because I wanted to find that person that really got it. It is stunning to us to see the level of lawyering that goes on in the range. So what we're looking for is somebody that does estate planning only. There's enough to learn with the dynamics of that, where we don't want a general practicing attorney, even though all will offer to do it. It's just really important to think about, if you're getting second opinions or this work done, we want somebody that lives and breathes it every minute of the day. So that profile represents a specialist, and we think that's one initial piece of advice that'll be helpful.
there you go. If I click ahead here, the next one, there we go, is a copy of a little review certificate. This is just a little reminder that we can get together anytime after tonight. We do have some available times for those people that are a little more urgent. Maybe they kicked the can a little too long and it's time to get something fixed. But either now or down the road, that's just a reminder that you can have that part 2 review. That's really all that's for, and you can keep that. And the last handout, if I can get her advanced here, maybe Andy might have to do it, or there we go. The last one just is a little bit more about Generations Legal Services. We're based out of Osseo, not far, just down the road, and some of the services we provide and how we try to serve all of our families. And you can keep all of those except that yellow card, if that's okay.
The content today is a lot of churches, but Compassion International, a lot of nonprofits, and people are aware of this for obvious reasons. I think we all need it to go. Pastor, what's the mortality rate again? Yeah.
Okay.
We wonder why these rooms are full and people are interested. It is just a really unique topic, because if you think about it, when we discuss it, if it were the 4 of us talking about it, we're talking about what we've earned our whole life, our kids, maybe their marriages, what we're inheriting from parents. It's just an incredibly dynamic topic that nobody generally wants to talk about, or it's just such an easy thing to kick down the field. So I think we're going to find that helpful tonight as we go into it. So let's keep going, Jake.
All right. I was thinking there we go. Well, we teach about a dozen workshops on this topic. Sometimes we're specific on estate settlements. Sometimes we talk about the family cabin, stopping the fighting before it starts. We have a class on the 25 documents needed before you pass. But this is our main one tonight. This is our estate planning 101, who will inherit the mess. And if we ask for hands on this one, I hope no hands would go up. Who wants to leave a mess behind? No one does. But the default, folks, when this stuff is not done correctly, whether maybe you don't have a plan, or the plan you do have is not quite solid enough, the default is a mess. And you're not going through that. You're on the streets of gold by that time, right? It's the people that are left behind. So we're trying to make sure that we preserve our assets that you work so hard to acquire and build. We protect them into our 3rd and 4th quarter of our lives, and eventually pass them to wherever you want them to go. Could be children, could be charities, churches, nonprofits, it could be a combination. At the bottom of this slide, you'll see 4 of our favorite words when it comes to estate planning. It's not so much about how much you have. Is that estate plan you have, or the one you're going to get, going to provide you and your loved ones with these 4 words, these adjectives: control, protection, privacy, efficiency, or is it not? So I want you to think about your estate plan through these lenses. Start thinking of it that way, because many times we're leaving a mess behind and we don't even realize it. And again, if you have any,
I think all
questions,
those-
there you go, you can go back.
Kind of share the fact that it is a news flash. It used to be that things passed rather elegantly, but right now, quite honestly, there's an $80 billion probate industry, lawyers, financial advisors. There's all kind of people that could potentially be in the way of your loved ones or charities getting what you want. So we just know that we have to be remarkably intentional. Most people leave this workshop knowing, I have what I need, or I need to check something, or man, I need to hurry up and get something done because I just simply have put it off long enough. So let's keep going and go on this next one. I don't think there'll be violent disagreement on any of this, but most of us don't want to, Jeff, if you'll just advance it.
There we go.
We don't want to be a burden. We don't want conflict. We don't want fighting, but it can be complex. There's different kinds of families that are involved now in different situations. And so I don't think we want lawyers involved, and if we can limit taxes, that's something that most people feel strongly about. But this next slide makes it a little bit interesting because today's world is a little bit different. We have people that have special needs. You were kind enough to share. You're here with your son. What's your son's name again? John. Hi, John. We were talking to your mom. The fact that John is here with his mom is cool. Some of you that I had talked to initially said, I'm thinking about this for my parents, and that's all good thinking because this is what's out there. We have family cabins. We have property in Florida. We have kids that are doing well. We have kids that might be going through a divorce. A little transparency, Jeff and I, we got to be pretty close friends because we had 2 unwanted divorces many, many years ago. And we just kind of licked our wounds and went through that. So I have 4 kids, and one of them is just had a baby last night, so that's kind of cool. I had my 9th grandchild last night. So that's kind of fun too. Yeah, thank you, Lord. 9 grandkids at 59 years old, my goodness. I'm a late model with a lot of miles, kind of like David Foy. Can I ask, are you growing your hair out a little bit more?
You look good, Dave.
I've got one for you called, it's a Gillette Helen Keller style. You just go like this. Anyway, my family's a situation too where I have 2 biological kids and 2 stepchildren. And so that creates some dynamics, because what happens if I leave everything to my wife now that we're celebrating our 16th year of marriage, and somehow one of my kids rubs her fender the wrong way someday? I don't want her to be able to disinherit my kids, so every family is different. And I think that we just need to be aware of that when we're doing a plan. So it's not a will is good or bad, or a trust is good or bad. It's the review that we have and the time that you've got available to you on the table is to help discern which one makes sense. But we have cabins and LLCs and business owners and all kinds of stuff here. Are there business owners in the room too? There's a few. I know, David, you've got your real estate practice, so that'll come up as well.
Yeah, these are all challenges. You know, no one's talking about taxes and all of this. We're so worried about just a simple will or trust. Taxes are a huge issue. It's a ticking time bomb if we're not, considering that. I've heard Chris say many times that the health of the states and the financial, well-being is more to do with tax strategy than even growth sometimes, especially as we get older. I think.
And the laws keep changing. In Minnesota, it used to be that it was about $700,000, but right now there's an amount that you can leave to your family without paying a Minnesota death tax. It's important that we know that, because if your amount is over that, there's unnecessary taxes. So we want to make sure your estate plan covers a lot of those topics. So we're going to talk about 4 things that are needed, but these are 2 slides before we do that. Dave, you and I were just talking about this before. This is probably the number 1 reason why a lot of people don't have a plan that's complete. And that would be true for many of the people in the room when you said will. Kids that are roughly the kids of baby boomers don't always ask mom and dad how much they have because they don't want to be appearing too covetous. And parents from the baby boomer generation don't say much, do they, Dave? We talked about that. Kids don't ask, parents don't tell, and then people pass away without a plan. So part of this, when I see you here with your mom and all of you are thinking about that, it's really important because it's changing. How many people have IRAs or 401ks? Do you know since COVID now, when you give that money to the kids, it's still taxable at their rates, not yours, and they only have 10 years to pay it back now, whereas you used to be able to do a stretch IRA. It's just really complicated, and we have to make sure to address all that stuff. So there's a couple ahas. I just saw a couple of fun looks on their face when they heard that too.
That's right. And even in that question, we talked about there was a tax component and a communication component, right, in what Chris mentioned. That's just some of these factors. And so find some level of communication that you're comfortable with your family. You don't have to share all the details, but if no one asks and no one says anything, now we're trying to put a puzzle together in the dark. once you're gone.
And
can't
we need a
ask-
family to do some examples today. So we're going to adopt Heidi and David Foy as our parents for tonight's role playing, okay? You don't have to do anything, Heidi.
Hi, Mom.
You can let Dave do all the talking. Huh? So, so for tonight, you guys are our parents and you have 3 kids. You've named me as the person responsible when you're gone for obvious reasons, right?
What a joke.
Jeff, you feel okay about, but Jake over there is on his 3rd marriage and he sells stuff in Colorado he shouldn't, okay? So he's going to be the Colorado kid, all right? So you're going to be the...
How do you know?
Yeah, I've seen your picture on the wall at the post office.
Yeah.
So I think this is the next part. I'm just going to kind of zoom in on this. And Dave in the back, I know we mentioned this, but think about these 3 people that are in your life. Lawyers do wills and trusts and deal with today's topic. Financial advisors are responsible for helping us make our chips bigger. And then CPAs, we like to joke a little bit. You know, we send them our paperwork every year and they kind of tell us how we died. They're like pathologists. Every year they tell us what we owe. But the avoiding of taxes and all of these 3 are usually 3 different people in our lives. So we usually have a lawyer, we have financial advisors, and CPAs, and quite honestly, they just don't talk as often as they could. As an example, up until December, I managed a group that had about $1 billion of retirement assets. It was just a larger Ameriprise franchise. And so I got a chance to train financial advisors all over the country, and it's just stunning that good financial advisors have something that's called UPL, the Unauthorized Practice of Law, which means financial advisors can't even talk about this legally. And lawyers do wills and trusts, but they don't have the securities and insurance licenses to recharacterize all of your assets, to put them inside the fence, so things just get missed regularly. And CPAs aren't jumping up saying, here's creative ideas to help deal with taxes. It's usually more of a responding. Right. So what happens is if these don't talk and you're in the middle and not connecting the dots, we just see things missed regularly, and that's what we're going to highlight tonight. Does that make sense, though? It's usually 3 different people, isn't it?
Yeah. Have any of you, I'm just curious, have any of you ever had these 3 advisors for you in the same room at the same time talking about your life or your finances or your planning?
I've watched David Foy try because he has got some accounting issues but it's work to get the team talking and saying the same thing because you get a lot of different opinions. Somebody was asking me just prior to, what is the deed in Florida? We were talking about it here. How do you get the Florida property into a current trust? And the answer she got is something completely different than what we experience every single day. Mm-hmm. So already we have somebody that has a lawyer that did an estate plan that has done something that is different than what we know is the norm, doing thousands of them, and that should be explored in the form of an opinion.
Yeah, and we found out another one today from one of our 4 attorneys, and she was giving us some clarification on a transfer deed for the state of Iowa. And if any of you have property down in Iowa, you cannot use a transfer on death deed, which we use every day here in Minnesota. They don't allow it. There's a different way you have to adjust or take care of that type of asset if it's real property. There's just all these interesting things, and it all comes back to the Bermuda Triangle. So this is a big problem in our industry.
I think those are a couple of reasons why it's not done. This is another one that's a little bit closer to the church as we go into these 4 things that are the core of the presentation. I think sometimes, this is a little hard to say, but it is true that the advice sometimes in the church is even lower than it is outside. Because you can be likable, trustworthy, and share a Christian faith and still not be the surgeon that knows really what they're doing. And it's hard to say, but that's where second opinions matter. It is important that you like and trust the people that you work with. And I love working with people where we share a faith, but we also owe it to our families to have absolute confidence. My dad had expect but inspect was something he just hammered home to us. He also said, you're leaving the house at 18 no matter what, and you'll never get a penny of my money. He made it really clear. He wanted us out of the house and that you had to make it on your own. He was one of 11 and lost half his brothers and sisters to booze, was raised on Franklin Avenue, and was a UPS guy that retired with some reasonable numbers, but if you followed UPS stock, he has a lot of zeros behind his name. I'm thankful he's modified that approach since. There's some coming, but we have 4 kids and a younger brother who struggled with alcohol. So he doesn't want to leave money to somebody that's had a lifetime issue with alcohol. So he needed something unique there that we'll talk about in a little bit. So I think we're going to jump in and cover the 4 things pretty quick here on
Jake,
what we need.
Do you want to talk about power of attorney?
Of course, I'd love to.
Why don't you handle those 2? Here they are right there.
So power of attorney and healthcare directive, show of hands, who knows what this is? Power of attorney and healthcare directive, we call these the living documents. This is preventative, but this is estate planning because, you don't want to wait till the end of life to do end of life planning, right? But should you have a bump on the head, an accident of some kind, you want to be able to have someone you love and trust to be able to execute your wishes on your behalf. So, power of attorney is simply a legal document that allows you to grant authority to someone to execute financial transactions, to access your accounts on your behalf, should you be incapacitated, not able to speak, maybe not able to write or anything of that nature. You want to have all of this done in advance in case something were to happen to you.
So I got a question. So if mom and dad are in an accident and they have a power of attorney, and they name our old elderly brother over here as the head point person, will we have any problem? Will we be able to access their money and help them out?
Well, if mom and dad have named brother, that's the other thing. You can appoint more than one person. Now, if mom and dad were not incapacitated, I'm not sure they would have named our...
We've already declared that I'm the
That's
responsible one in this story, so you guys can just knock it off,
But
all
of
right?
course, you can name... We often see that. Parents naming multiple kids with the authority, and they can act independent of each other. So if I'm in Colorado still, enjoying my hobbies, then, of course, my...
But Jake, I think you bring a good point too, because even your kids, if they're over 18, they need to have somebody to act on their behalf, because all of us end up in court to be named as a guardian and a conservator, even for husband and wife. So without a power of attorney and you're not able to act, in order to do a Social Security disability claim or any like that, you have to go to court to even act for a spouse. So a good current power of attorney makes a difference.
And then switching over to the healthcare directive, you're basically preserving your dignity and your healthcare wishes. You're expressing them in advance. Should something happen, then your dignity and your wishes are preserved, and your loved one can execute anything healthcare related on your behalf without you having to express that. So you're going to be putting in anything regarding medicine, any healthcare environmental decisions. All of that will be expressed and written to whoever you deem.
That's an interesting word, though, dignity. I haven't heard you say that one before, but it is true. I mean, we all have very intimate wishes and about what we want. And do you remember the oath that doctors take if we don't give them other instructions? The Hippocratic, they keep you alive, don't they? So I know that most people feel like what's on that healthcare directive is if I'm in a terminal condition and there's no chance for me to survive, I want to die naturally. But I also want to be treated for the maximum amount of pain and comfort, even if it hastens my death. So my mom we lost 9 years ago, and she was a nurse for 27 years, and she was about this big. But she fell on a bone-on-bone arthritic shoulder, and it required fentanyl-level narcotics for her to even, keep from being, from moving and hurting. But my dad, even with it being documented in her healthcare directive, was upset because they were giving her so much narcotics that he wanted to communicate with my mom. So it can be enormously personal, and I think the more you share with your family members about how you want to care for, the better. Wouldn't you say?
Exactly. You're putting that in so that they don't have to go through that painful process of making decisions for you.
Yeah. So hypothetical mom and dad, if you're going to give me the responsibility, Heidi, I need to know that when Dave has a hangnail that we can pull the plug, and there will be no issue with that, right?
The healthcare is so important. We see so many that will have a healthcare directive activated. It usually needs to be notarized. Sometimes it needs to be witnessed. Sometimes it needs to have both. It usually needs to be notarized. But then beyond that, so you got an active document, but no one ever fills it out. No one ever writes down their wishes. What do you want? What do you not want? If we're named as your healthcare agents, mom and dad, and you've got a bump on the head, sure, we've got that authority, but we have no idea what we should do because you never gave us any additional info. So make sure you fill that out. And dads might be filled out differently than moms, because we're guys and we care a little less when it gets to that point. Just, let me go. So don't just get them and throw them on the shelf. Make sure, you have these. Now, why are they called? Jake said they're a living document. What does that mean? Anyone know? Bueller? What was that? Yeah, they're only valid. That power of attorney and healthcare, one's for money, one's for metal. They're only valid while you're alive. This has nothing to do with your will or trust. All right, so these are living documents, and then we're going to move into
When you
the death
pass away,
documents.
the authority of your kids changes to either an executor of a will or a trustee of a trust. But I like that we're covering those. Anybody that's doing an estate plan for you would include current documents for
Yeah.
power of attorney and healthcare directive. One really important tip too, just seeing a lot of financial advisors across the country, they struggle because the power of attorney from Minnesota is different from other states. It's really important that you check in with your financial advisor and find out if they have their own. As an example, Ameriprise and Eddie Jones in particular, they have their own power of attorney. They're concerned about accepting multiple different types from multiple different states, so they have their own. So Dave, if you and Heidi needed help and I was your son and I used the power of attorney most lawyers use and the one that's in most people's binder, it doesn't work at Ameriprise. You need to have a specific one. So in your review, you can let me know, or the guys, on who your advisors are, and we can tell you if you might need to have a second one. I know that's a little frustrating, but it is a reality that we're facing every day.
Does anyone have any questions on the POA or what we call the HCD before we move on? Go ahead.
Yeah, if you're declaring these health agents or power of attorney people, if the spouse assumed one of those, and then you would do kids, or if you would have a...
Good question. Everyone has their own document. So dad's going to have his POA and mom's going to have her POA. They're independent documents. You would name each other, typically, if you're a married couple. Dad's going to name mom as his number one helper. Mom's going to name dad. What if mom and dad are in the same car accident? Then they better have an alternate or a backup. And that's where you can name your adult children if you have any. They have to be at least 18. And then if you don't have any children or they're minors, you'd have to maybe pick a sibling or someone else that could be an alternate, and then you can update it once the kids get older. So everyone has their own document. We're naming each other first.
I think Jake made a good point too. It's usually better to go in order versus jointly. Banks, if you name joint power of attorney or joint on any legal documents, oftentimes they're going to want both people there. And we try to avoid that. So usually when we're drafting, we would say Chris, then Jeff, with the ability to act independently. And that gives us the best options. One can do it, he can do it, but we don't have to both get stuck. So I think that's helpful as well.
Yep. Any other questions? Go ahead, Dave.
Just going to comment on the housing side of this, is that in my business, I work with a lot of people who have senior citizens, even a lot older than I am, parents. And suddenly something happens, you're trying to accomplish my job as a real estate broker, but along the way, the wrong lawyer, wrong advice, wrong everything, you can't get the job done because a POA dies with the person.
That's exactly right.
And the chain of events doesn't end to a closing on time or correctly because somebody's given wrong advice. So POAs are useless if someone's not alive, someone said that already. But secondly, we love it when we walk into senior citizen situations. I was with someone last night who's 90 years old with 55 acres and now approved to be developed. Fortunately, one of her children were there. I wish they all would have been there.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. So this kind of arrangement that we're talking about tonight, really go home, talk to your families, definitely talk to your parents that are seniors that may or may not have something cooked.
What's interesting about what Dave is talking about is life is like this. It's jagged and it comes in spurts. And we don't know when things are going to happen. So now is the perfect time to do planning. Because you're right, you could be in the middle of trying to sell the cabin and then somebody passes away. And if you haven't given the responsibility to your son and the authority, those are two words just to think about. Who are you naming to be responsible? But then bless them with the authority to not involve lawyers and courts and everything to be able to act on your behalf. That's what these four things that we're covering tonight do. They make sure that if you've named somebody, that they also have the authority that goes with it to be able to do the job. Dave, that's a perfect example. Real estate transactions, people selling cabins, people in the middle of doing a charitable gift to Trout Lake Camp, and then somebody dies in the middle of it.
Or becomes incapacitated. Right, then either way, that process stops cold unless they have some of these documents in place. Yes,
Jeff?
in the back.
When you mentioned the financial advisors having their own power of attorney, can you give some examples for how the nuance is different from your own power of attorney?
Yeah, it's the one that you usually get from the lawyer is the Minnesota statutory short form power of attorney, and we'll be showing that, and there's a way to get that. It's the stock document that comes from the Attorney General in the state of Minnesota, and all states are a little bit different. Ours was updated in 2014, but the concept of the power of attorney is your financial advisor Their back office and their legal department is terrified of that because somebody might be trying to show up with a Florida power of attorney to help a parent in Minnesota. So they're just requiring more and more standards right now. You'll find that banks are struggling with this topic because everybody's afraid of being sued. And if you're the daughter and come in and say, I need $100,000 for my parents' care at Presbyterian Homes, they're already looking at you sideways because they want to be sure and know that they're releasing money and that all of those documents are current. So just know there's a tension everywhere to make sure you are who you say you are and that these documents have precision in terms of the authority that's being given. And more often than not, when we do a review with you, that was easy for me to say, a review with you.
Who's selling what in Colorado?
Maybe I'm buying from my younger brother here. I did sound like I might be a little incapacitated there. It's the end of a longer day, right? So when we do the review, usually we find out that the power of attorney or whatever it happens to be, that's the advantage of doing that short meeting, is uncovering those things. But that's an excellent question.
The last thing I'll say about that specific POA at your financial institution, if they have you do one, that's only valid at that institution.
Correct.
For those assets that are under their management. You can't take an Ameriprise POA and go across the street to U.S. Bank. You're going to need your general one. Does that make sense? So he gets because there could be multiple POAs, or who do we all name? So just take your time, or we can cover that in the review.
Be comforted, though. The statutory one is accepted by most banks, most real estate transactions, everything. It's pretty common to have that. It's just being a bigger issue for some institutions. So let's go past the first two.
One
We've
more,
done
Dave,
that.
or Andy. There we go. Before we get into wills, you wanted to
Yeah,
touch
we're
a
just
little
going to
bit
do
about this.
a 3-minute timeout on generosity. Dave had me help somebody recently, and Pastor, we're talking about this all the time. When we sell assets, whether it's a farm or appreciated stock or cabins, that money is going to go one of 3 places. It's going to go to our family, it's going to go to church and charities, or it's going to go to the IRS. And if everybody had to vote for 2, it wouldn't be difficult, right? So we have a little playful one. We pay our taxes, but when we can disinherit Washington in favor of family and charities, we should try to do so. So I just wanted to give you 2 cool examples of that for these next 2 slides. One many people are unaware of, and Pastor, this is where it's fun to come alongside you and church leadership, is it's a little bit small, but there is something called a QCD, a Qualified Charitable Distribution. For those of you that are 70 and a half, Uncle Sam makes you take money out of your IRA and pay taxes, right? It's called the required minimum distribution. For those of you that aren't that age, it's coming. That 401k feels wonderful right now, and so does your IRA. At 70 and a half, it hurts because you have to pull money out and more every year at ever-increasing tax rates, and then you leave it to kids who are typically in their prime earning years. Well, when we love church and we write our check for tithe, that's coming out of our checkbook generally. That's money that's already been taxed. So if you want to give $5,000 to church over the year, you can have it go directly out of your IRA to the church. We disinherit Washington, and it satisfies the IRS that you've done your required minimum distribution. So in the body of Christ, we want to be good stewards, and if there's a more thoughtful bucket to give, then that's part of getting good comprehensive advice too. So that's a fun way for all of you that are getting older that enjoy serving the church or charity, that you can be giving out of a more appropriate bucket. It's called a QCD. Is that helpful? I see a few people smiling on that one. I'm going to do one other one just verbally. Dave, if it's okay, we have a friend that we met mutually that was selling a farm, and we'll just say it's $1 million farm. On $1 million in Minnesota, between federal long-term capital gains tax in Minnesota, you're going to lose about 33 cents on the dollar. So if you sell $1 million farm, you're going to make about $670,000, and that hurts.
That's capital gains.
That's the capital gains tax in Minnesota. So if anybody here is selling a business or thinking about it, or selling a farm that has a capital gain, there are a bunch of tools. And what I'm going to say tonight, just in that short slide, is just push the pause button and look a little bit deeper. In this particular case, the family took the farm, 90% of it, and put it into what's called a charitable remainder trust. It's an IRS trust that allows them now to get a tax deduction, and when the farm is sold, they have the $900,000 tax deduction, but it gives them income for the rest of their life and for 5 years past their death or as long as they want to their kids. But when that is over, the remainder interest goes to a charity. When you use these tools, often you make more money by doing what I just said than paying it and just taking the tax hit. So it's not tonight's topic, but just know, just like the qualified charitable distribution, if you're selling a large asset, there are ways that you can benefit the things you love, your family and charities, without giving so much to Uncle Sam.
I remember your story about Sharon, and she was wanting to give a gift to Trout Lake Camp, and she thought it was going to be this big, but by the time she utilized some of these tools, it was that big. It was, I remember you talking about that.
The financial advisor said, sell the cabin, pay the capital gains, invest the money with me, and we'll give the dividends and interest to Trout Lake.
Yeah, that's it.
And that was kind of a benefit the advisor, benefit everybody else, but not so much Trout Lake. They avoided probate by doing their estate plan that we're going to finish up with here tonight. And on top of it, they were able to give a gift to Trout this last year of over $400,000 and are building a prayer cabin for pastors up there at Trout Lake.
And she still came out better, or the family did as well. It's just a neat story. So that's what some of these tools are.
We're going to jump into the next two. Why don't you want will or trust tonight?
I'll do will.
Okay.
Actually, I'll do trust. Why don't you do will? And I'll do trust.
This slide is a clever way to try to remember, and for those of you, this is where we'll probably see a few expressions in the room. My question for you is, will you go to probate? And the reason it's interesting is because it's a question, but it's also the answer. Will you go to probate? In Minnesota, even with a will that says exactly what you want to have happen, Mom and Dad, to go to us 3 kids, a will does nothing to avoid probate. You still must go through probate. Probate is a court delivery and distribution of your assets, and it's avoidable. And I think that surprises people because we've heard all these years to get our will done, get your will done, get your will done. But I want you to think about this if you're writing it down. A will is a letter of instruction to a judge. How in the world did Aretha Franklin and Prince and so many different people end up in court? Because lawyers make $80 billion a year having you do your will and then taking your kids through probate someday. And we want to avoid that. And I think that surprises some people. Even just by a show of hands, are there some of you that have a will that had not heard that before? Yeah, it really is remarkable. There was a gentleman in a Stillwater workshop, it was at Boutwell Landing, and he had the oxygen tube, and he was on a heart monitor, and he had 4 properties, and he just got his will done with a very established lawyer in Stillwater. And we were sharing with him that the will doesn't do anything, and he was getting upset, and so he's become a pretty good friend. I said, go back and talk to the lawyer on why they didn't do that, and the answer is you didn't ask for that. And so we want to make sure that if you're going to be getting an estate plan, that it addresses everything and all the different assets, whether it's Florida property or whatever it happens to be.
It's not to say the will is bad. The will in and of itself can't do much. That will has to be probated. Then those instructions get carried out through the probate process. So eventually things will get where you want them to, but who benefits all the way through that process? It's usually courts and lawyers. So the will in and of itself isn't bad. I'm going to take your line, and can I one-up you? We heard a lawyer in Minneapolis describe a will as a public love letter you write to a probate judge you've never met. Mm-hmm.
Say that again.
That was brilliant. And
Say that again.
That's what it is. And no one
It's a public love letter.
It's a public love letter you write to a probate judge you've never met.
Yeah. Well, it's avoidable.
Right.
The Converge North Central, the first thing they did, the 2 executives, had us do the estate plan for their parents. And so Mark Bureau, the president of Converge North Central, his mom was the executor of a will, Aunt Ruth, who just died with 9 kids and thought everything was fine, had no idea that the entire state was going to probate. And so that was a really aha moment. It was one of the things that launched this relationship. So can you show probate over there? You've got the chart.
Yeah, Andy, let's... We're getting that, so, well, that's what this is. We'll get to that in the next slide. So the will, if you want to learn a little more, we're going to talk a little bit about real estate and then, again, the difference between wills and trusts. But this is a document we always show each class. And this is not just Jeff, Chris, or Jake talking about this stuff. This is Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota. So this is a pamphlet that's available to all of you. You can just Google it, or you can see the website there in blue. Andy, go one more. But on page 8 of this one, you're going to see that, I know it's small, but having a will does not avoid probate. So it's just making sure we understand that. And then it says, unless your real estate is owned jointly or placed into a trust, it must be probated. And the probate will occur in the county where the real estate is located, oh, by the way, which could be up in Cass County or in Arizona or Florida. So now your kids are having to deal with that. So we're going to talk a little bit about ownership.
And when you have a will, it doesn't mean that it can't work, but let's just talk about what would need to be added. And the review will highlight this. But so in your particular case that we were talking, where there's a co-op that you live in, and that you've got a cabin that's also here in Minnesota, did I understand that right? And then a Florida property. So if you had a will, you could, in Minnesota, there's a document called a transfer on death deed where you can take the cabin and say this cabin goes to these kids and add it to the will, and now you'll avoid probate. But if I get a cabin with my 3 brothers using a transfer on death deed, you avoided probate. But now when you're gone, there's 3 people here. In Minnesota, as David well knows, real estate transactions require all 3 of us and our spouses to sign off, doesn't it, David? So what happens if he can afford it and wants it, he can afford it and doesn't want it, I just want to sell the thing tomorrow, and now we have 6 people involved in the transaction. That's a potential mess. So we want to make sure that when we're doing your plan that we're avoiding probate, but it's also something that it's clear. We have a family cabin on Lake Riley that my parents spent $60,000 for, and it's 500 feet on Lake Riley, if you know that, down in Eden Prairie. It's Bear Path now, and we have this little cottage, the last one on the lake around all these houses. So it's like a $2 million property right now. If my dad at 88 sold it, he'd pay all the capital gains. He's leaving it in his estate so it passes at the step-up in basis with no taxes. So be aware of that. Don't sell real estate that's highly appreciated. It's usually best to do it at the time of death if you can, because all the taxes go away. But in our family, there's 2 that want it and 2 that don't. So my dad's trust happens to say that Julie and Greg have the first right of refusal to have their portion of the inheritance satisfied by the value of that property at the time of death. We want really clear instructions for cabins and for Florida properties to make sure that there's no fussing amongst the kids. Those are lightning rods that often can create some turmoil.
So for those of you that have a will, and I'm glad Dave is here, because guess what the number 1 trigger of probate or instigator of probate is, or initiator? It's real estate, because the titles and deeds are always screwed up. People always, I got a will done, so I'm done. So we always got to come back and look at real estate. That's why that next line is highlighted, because it either has to be owned jointly, which in our opinion isn't good enough either. That might be fine on the first death, because the right of survivor will get it. But what happens when mom dies? Well, now where does the house go? So that might get stuck then. Or you got to place it into a trust, like your dad
Let's put
did.
the probate slide up there,
so
or
that's
the
why are
will
we
slide.
talking about probate so much? Because, folks, probate, you know who hates probate is your kids. You know who loves probate is the legal industry. So this is an example of what probate is. It's our only Vanna White slide that I have for you tonight. So I'm going to walk across, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
Thank you, Vanna.
Thank you. You're very welcome, Pat. This is a problem for families because it's time-consuming, it's frustrating, it's confusing, and it's expensive.
And it's avoidable.
And it's avoidable. It's all avoidable.
So Dave and Heidi, hypothetical mom and dad, if you're going to have a will and name me as the oldest person and you don't want to do anything other than that, there's probate involved, name Jake. He caused all the trouble. Don't put me down as executor if he was the one that caused all the hurt. You know, you got to get a little bit payback.
Yeah. Because that executor has got to deal with this in courts and lawyers. And if any of you have agreed to be an executor or, that point person for another family member, yeah, I'll do it when you're gone. You're likely assuming their ducks are in a row. We know enough now, the 3 of us, we're never saying yes to be anyone else's executor until we review the estate plan, because otherwise I might be biting off more than I'm willing to chew in the future.
The review is helpful. So for instance, ma'am, if you had 1 child and a primary home, a couple of bank accounts and an IRA, is that you? We didn't meet either, did we? Do you have 1 child? Do you have 1 home? Do you have a bank account? So we're simpatico here. We didn't plan that, by the way. But it is a really interesting example that a will might be really appropriate for you because it's less than a trust. You name the 1 child. The deed is a transfer on death deed that gets added to the will, and that might be a lower cost estate plan that would work great for somebody. But for somebody with 3 kids and multiple properties, oftentimes a will is not as convenient. So thanks for on the fly. We just came up with a good example of how a will can work.
The summary on this, or one of the take-homes, is the will can't do anything in and of itself. It's a set of instructions, but you have to go and address the assets. So I always ask in the workshops, what about the assets? How are they owned? Are there beneficiaries set up on those assets? Yes or no? Who is named as that beneficiary? Is that who you want? All these things. So you got to make sure you're putting the plumbing in place to make sure all of your assets go where you want them to go when you punch out. Because the will is only there to take them out through court and figure it out according to these rules later on. But let's try to avoid this if we can. And the only way to avoid it is if you set up your assets on your own. and a transfer deed is used for property.
It is true that if you have beneficiaries on everything and a transfer on death deed for real estate, you will avoid probate. So if your IRAs name each other and then the kids, and if your joint stock accounts name the kids as TOD, transfer on death, if you're taking notes, your investment advisor needs to add TOD, transfer on death, to get a beneficiary. Banks do POD, payable on death. And real estate would need a TOD, transfer on death deed. If you don't want to remember all that, that's exactly what we cover in about 20 minutes in a review. Yeah. So I think you can find that helpful. Our goal is to avoid probate, but I also have to say that even if we're all 4 brothers and you have 3 properties, Mom, if we did a transfer on death deed in Minnesota for the 2, and it's called a ladybird deed down in Florida, we talked about that. There's a different name for different states. If all 4 of us on everything, that means all of us are doing an application to get 1/4 of the life insurance, 1/4 of the IRA, 1/4 of the bank accounts. We're all filling out claim forms individually to get what was put on those beneficiary forms. I think that's why a lot of times people enjoy a trust, which we're going to go into next.
Yeah, and we'll hit that. That's a trust kind of solves some of these problems that a will might introduce for beneficiaries. Because remember, that beneficiary form is taking that asset from A to B when A passes away. And we have no idea what B is going to be going through on that day when they inherit all this money. There could be problems. There could be a divorce like we didn't see coming. There could be medical issues. God forbid the person predeceased you and we never updated the beneficiary. It could be a minor. There could be claims, litigation. There's all kinds of reasons why beneficiaries may not be the best way to pass assets.
Jeff, in the interest of time, I think we'll just go to this last piece here too, because we're kind of winding down. We've talked about the living documents. We need a healthcare directive and a power of attorney. And now we're comparing and contrasting a will versus a trust. So here's a good summary for a will. It is public. For $6, I can go to the probate court and see the names of the kids, attend the court hearings. It's a public process. So most people want to avoid that. You also spend money with lawyers, and so it's kind of weird that we're all spending money on lawyers when we're supposed to be getting an inheritance and we're writing checks to lawyers to take us through a year-long probate process. And it's where people contest things. That's kind of a quick summary of a will. Let's compare it now quickly to a trust. And what I'm going to start is, Jeff, it's interesting. We talk about a trust as like a fence to protect everything. Matter of fact, most of our clients don't even say trust anymore. They say we sold our house and bought a townhome, but we don't think it's in the fence. It's just an easy way to say, I want all my assets protected. So in a trust that mom and dad set up, they are the grantors, which means they created it, and you're the trustees. So Heidi and Dave are responsible for everything. And they would set up a revocable living trust. Revocable means you can change it. If I fall out of favor, Jeff can be the trustee. If they decide to give 50% to church and less to us, you can amend it. But it is a set of rules like a will, but it has some characteristics that are pretty significant. Mm-hmm. So let's just start by calling it a fence in the first place.
That's
you want to
right.
add to that?
It's meant to protect and hold your assets for the benefit of others. So that the trust is like a parking lot, or a fence, or whatever you want to think of it. But the problem with trust is a trust cannot protect or distribute something it doesn't have, right? You got these instructions written in a trust. Here's an example of one right here. But the trust is kind of a two-step approach. We have to have the lawyers draft your legal document. And that's, again, your instructions, who gets what, who's in charge. Mom and dad would draft all of that into the trust. But when you sign and notarize that thing, it turns into an entity. It's like a business you establish, but it's a trust. It's your legal plan. And that entity can own and protect the assets. So we want to get all your assets, which are your animals, inside the protective fence. We got to retitle your real estate. We got to change your beneficiaries. You're no longer now going to name the 3 amigos up here, mom and dad. You're going to name your 4th child, which is your favorite, which is named trust. So we want all the money going to the trust first. See the difference? And the trust says, us 3 guys get equal shares or whatever.
So let's talk about it, Dave. You and Heidi are mom and dad. You've named me as the successor trustee. A will, you name an executor or a personal representative. With an estate plan that's a trust, it's just different titles. You're the trustees, and when you're gone, you're leaving a successor trustee, and that would be my title. If we did everything correctly, when you pass away, Dave, it becomes still a revocable trust for Heidi, but when both of them are gone, it becomes irrevocable, which means I can't change the rules. I just have to follow what mom and dad said. So I can send a death certificate to Edward Jones, Northwestern Mutual Life, State Farm, sell all the real estate, and I'm doing all of that. and the money is landing in a trust account after it's gone. So as long as all of your assets are titled correctly, then what's beautiful is in 45 days, Mom and Dad, I have the responsibility. I don't need any lawyers. I just pass out death certificates and claim forms, and then I look at my brother and say, marriage in good shape?
Yep.
You putting any kids through college? Because you don't want to inherit money when you're filling out a FAFSA application.
Correct.
Okay, so
No
coast is
problem.
clear. He gets a third of the assets, and so do I. Jake, any prison in your current?
So I got an offender bender. Can you just slide me $15? I'm kind of hungry right now.
Okay. So you don't want your inheritance is what you're saying because you were in an accident and you got a creditor looking down your
Right.
neck. So that's the beauty. See, we can keep Jake's 1/3 in the trust account. It's an entity. It never dies. It's like a bank account, but it's not owned by the three of us. It's owned by your trust. And that money can stay in there as long as Jake needs it to, so we're not dropping money on a child's head when they're not ready for it or when they don't want it. It's a wonderful protective option to give
So
your
for
loved
those
ones.
of you with no documents, it would be a discussion out, will a will work or a trust? For those of you that have a will, there'd be a discussion about will or trust. For those of you that raise your hand that have trusts, the review would be making sure that it's funded. Our little anecdote was just minutes, and it sounds like you've got a revocable trust and that the Minnesota property is in the trust. And because you live in a co-op, did the co-op put the name of the trust on the co-op unit? So now you have, does that sound right? Okay, because oftentimes in co-ops, it's still in people's individual names, but the co-op has a unique document to put it in.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something about Florida, may or may be in the trust. So here's a really great example that she could be 99% of the way there. And there is a quitclaim deed, just like for your house, that a Florida attorney will do to put Florida inside your Minnesota revocable trust, and you'd be done. So we would be doing a quick funding review to make sure that we had that all finished.
Yeah, otherwise everything in Minnesota is great, but now we got to probate the property down in Florida, and we got to go through this down in Florida. So that's Andy. Let's go to the next slide because we're talking about funding the trust, getting your animals inside the fence, and this is the challenge with trust. So there's pros and cons to all of this. We're not here to say trusts are the answer to your estate planning prayers and wills are not, but you got to handle this differently. So if you have a trust, the number one problem we see is things are still owned in your personal name, and that should not be. It should be owned by the trust, or if you do own something in your personal name, the beneficiary of that asset should be the trust. So that money goes through the rule book when you're gone. See the difference? That's called funding your trust. And now we're getting back to the Bermuda Triangle because the lawyer can't do any of this that we've just been talking about typically.
That's typically why the churches enjoyed the relationship with our firm, because we act as a project manager for you. We're the nurse, we do all the work, and the doctors make all the money. But the running around and making sure, meeting with your financial advisors, having the beneficiary change forms, making sure the real estate gets in there, that's what we do. It takes about 45 days. If you need a will, power of attorney, and a deed for a house to avoid probate, that's typically about $2,000. Just kind of know $200 to $2,200 from somebody who knows what they're doing. If you have a revocable living trust and one or two properties and your net worth is below $3 million and it's relatively straightforward, you'd probably spend $4,000 to get that entire project done. Those checks get written to the attorney. We vet the attorneys, and those attorneys are used to working with us, so we get most of the work done so that they come in and out quickly. And that's what keeps the price at a fixed rate and not hourly, and I think people find helpful. $4,000 to write a check to an attorney, nobody enjoys. But if you add up your IRA, your 401k, your property, most people's net worth is higher than they think when they add it all up. We just don't allow ourselves to realize what we have sometimes. So I think that sets some expectations on pricing. So when we have a review, these are kind of the next steps. Jeff, I think you made an important point. Trusts don't do anything unless they're funded correctly. And sir, you were kind enough to let us laugh a little bit about a will that might be 40 plus years old. My guess is your life has changed a little bit in 40 years? Just a bit? True for all of us. We have deaths, new properties, and everything else. So when you get your estate plan done, it's important to review it every couple of years. Know this, though, that if your trust or will is done correctly, for the most part, you can amend or write a codicil without starting over. It was done correctly. But even those of you that have trust right now, I could probably guarantee you that there'll be a funding issue that we find, and there's a couple of tax laws that oftentimes don't have the base language that many lawyers use. So we'd want to talk to you about that in your review as well.
We're going pretty quick. Are there any questions about a will or a trust that you have? Don't feel like you can't ask a question. What's the difference between a revocable trust and an irrevocable trust? Because there's about 30 different types of trusts, folks, but at the end of the day, they're going to fall in one of those two buckets. A revocable trust is a trust you set up now, and you're in charge of it, and you can change the rules. You can put assets into that trust or retitle things. You can take assets out of the trust. Everything is still yours. That trust is really meant to protect everything from probate when you're gone. But in the meantime, it's all yours. You can spend the money down, save more. An irrevocable trust is different. You set up that type of trust. It has rules. It says who's in charge and all of that. But once it's set up and you fund it with maybe a bank account or a life insurance policy, you can't change it. It's set in stone, and it's ready to do its thing whenever you punch out. So they're meant to... There's a lot of reasons for them. We can get into that into the review, but that's basically one is changeable.
Most don't have
one
any
is not.
need for an irrevocable trust. Most people don't need an irrevocable trust. Most people, when we're thinking about estate planning, would do a revocable that turns to irrevocable at death because we don't want the rules to change. Those of you that might use one while you're alive right now might be that you have a big farm that's appreciating and you don't want it appreciating in your name so it creates taxes at death. But for the most part, know that that's the case. There was one question here, and then we'll grab that one in the back. Go ahead, ma'am.
You talked about Minnesota trust,
Yeah.
Iowa trust. How big of a deal is it to transfer? You do all this work in Minnesota, you move to Iowa, now.
It's a really good question she's asking about where your trust was done. Most trusts have a change of situs clause that make it somewhat portable between most of the states. I can tell you that if you move to Florida, the laws are so substantially different that oftentimes when you move to Florida, they'll want you to re-domicile your trust and do it over there. And if you move back to Minnesota, change it again. So just kind of know, in general, if the trust is done right, it does have some portability to it because most of them work the same way. A rough answer, there's more detail to that, but in the interest of that, ask a little bit more during the review.
For the most part, they'll transfer. We do recommend, though, you do get a state-specific power of attorney and healthcare directive when you move to that, whether you're going to Iowa or wherever. Those are kind of state-specific. They're easy to get. But the trust itself, that takes
There's one in the back with my fellow, we have the same barber. We were just enjoying each other's company earlier.
I've heard that.
What was your
1,000
question?
times, folks.
It's another good one. It's kind of a wives' tale. No, a trust does nothing to avoid the nursing home. Assets are protected from probate with clear instructions, but they're still owned by mom, or in your case, if it's your trust, it's owned by you guys. You're trustees of your trust, so the IRS would look at that you still own that, and so would Medicaid and the nursing home. So just know that a trust doesn't protect anything. You would need nursing home insurance, or your parents would need to give assets away and start the 5-year look back. That's another thing too. Be very, very careful about giving your property to your kids while you're alive. I'll give you one quick example as we're closing down too, and then we're going to leave it up to you if you guys want to keep answering questions because we're about 5 minutes after 7. But I just helped somebody 2 years ago that owns a big chunk, 200 acres, just south of Taylor's Falls, overlooking the bluff. Gorgeous property. It's worth about $14 million, and he's an individual. His mom's 92 and spent $100,000 in the 40s. And she just transferred the entire property to him. He's in a same-sex relationship for 30 years, but transferred the interest and then died. He inherited her interest, the basis of that, when she got it. So now when he sells it, it's all taxable. If she would have just done the transfer on death deed and given it to him at death for a document that cost $45, the capital gains on $12 million would have gone away. So be careful. Be careful about giving property and ask for advice before that.
Was she worried about the nursing home, though, and wanting to get that off of her
No, it was
balance sheet?
convenience. She was getting older, and they didn't know about it, and the financial advisor didn't say anything, and so they just said, why don't we transfer the deed now, because we don't have to worry about it, and all of a sudden a tax problem came.
Yeah, so we get questions all the time. Well, why don't I just put the kids' names on the deed now? So we'll kind of, and that's what Chris is talking about. Well, you can. It's not always recommended because the kids, they'll get the property, but they're also going to get that capital gain. So got to be careful. There's other ways of getting the property off your balance sheet if you're worried about the nursing home and still getting it to the kids without paying a capital gain.
Jeff, we have one more right here, too. Go ahead, ma'am.
Just to make it clear, you said if you have beneficiaries on tenure, whatever,
It does. So I know that there's some comfort in that, because if you name each other first and then the kids, then you know that that will be the case. But know that the non-IRA, usually with financial advisors, it says JNTWROS, that's joint with rights of survivorship. That means it goes to your husband and vice versa at death, but it didn't have TOD, transfer on death. So our review can help you do that. And the only other thing I would say is avoiding probate is one thing, but mom and dad, if you were to do that and you've got a property now with 3 kids, you have 6 decision makers, and just remember, everybody is doing paperwork. So if your goal is to leave things simple, you can avoid probate, but the discussion is really, what is the simplest thing when you're gone? But that is true. If it has a beneficiary, it won't go to probate.
That's right. So again, but be careful, because the recipient of that beneficiary, we have no idea what they're going to be going through when that money spigot gets turned on. So depending on the amount or the type of asset, some people might want more control, protection, or efficiency.
Pastor, we're starting to wind down, and there's some good questions. Go ahead. Do you have another one, ma'am? It's a good question, too. It's really either or is the primary strategy. You're going to use a will-based plan or a trust. The question is there a time where you'd have both? But when you think about it, the review will say, am I going to use a will or a trust-based plan? Not to be confusing, when you do have a trust, there's a little baby will that's called a pour-over will. That just means if you forgot to tell us something, pour it into the estate. And it's also where you write down wedding rings and armoires and personal property. Mm-hmm. But for tonight's discussion, you'll be making a decision, do I use a will-based plan or a trust based on the pros and cons? And the review is what kind of sorts that thing out. We're always a little hypersensitive about time because we're here on an evening, but these questions really benefit everybody too. Are you guys okay with a few more questions? Okay, Dave, you got one?
I had a comment. You're free to talk about this for hanging at first thing. We were dumb and happy thinking everything was fine until we ran into you.
Were you dumb and she was happy? Just for some clarification, Dave?
We had thought, we started with a will 41 years ago when our son was born, and then that gravitated into, I learned a little bit, the old saying, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So we learned enough to go see an attorney to put together a trust, okay? Then through a mutual contact, John.
Yep. It was an Ameriprise advisor, and we had a chance to meet. Well, here's why we lost money doing it. We're having some fun. Dave had a good trust. It was done by a good lawyer. But he has real estate and ownership in a sport club, whatever. There was a lot of different things he had going on, and most of them weren't in the trust. So he had a situation where it wasn't funded. So David said, could you help us fund it? So we had quoted, you okay if I say the number? We quoted $1,100 because funding a trust isn't that difficult. And so that's the deal that Dave got, and then pulled out the number of assets that he had. And he made a comment about 3 months later, how in God's name did you guys do that amount of work for $1,100? Yeah. And the answer was, we didn't. That was really a challenging project. But it was a super...
Now you know.
Because the assets, not because of you, Dave.
That's
you guys
right.
have been a dream.
One of the things, you can pay us back when you're gone.
The things that I think that you do best, David, in getting to know you over the years is, I know I don't know everything, and it's impossible for us to know all of this. It takes us a team of 30 people to keep up on all of this. So our encouragement in closing is this, if there's ever a nudge, is keep moving. Take advantage of the time. The grant allows us to do these one-on-one meetings, and if you were comfortable tonight, you're going to be even more comfortable after that review. We have only about 6 or 8 questions that Jake, Jeff, and I ask, and we can quickly see what is going on and what you might do, and then just kind of look at your plan. Half the people we see in this room will have you go back to your financial advisor and change 1 or 2 things, and we'll be done. Mm-hmm. For those of you that need to mobilize a plan, it typically takes 45 days. So that's the beauty of all of this, is just to say, you know what? Second opinions matter. My wife, Ann, who some of you have met, is a younger gal at 54, but she's a breast cancer survivor. And we went to the Piper Breast Center, and we were convinced that was like Rochester, Mayo. And they said X, and we got a second opinion from Humphrey. And we know Humphrey found something that saved my wife's life. You guys have worked your entire life. And if you add up 401ks and IRAs, many people in Minnesota, the fact that you're at this church and live in the Maple Grove area, we're blessed. And we have an opportunity to steward it well. So our invitation is to hand your assets to your kids on a silver platter and not a dirty garbage can lid that just doesn't have any clear direction. And there's just a really unique chance to do that. And so kids encourage parents. We were talking in the back, should you encourage your parents to do this? Exactly.
Yeah.
Those of us with aging parents, and we're probably close to the same age when we had this discussion with my fellow barber friend in the back, motivating our parents to not leave us a mess is a great idea.
And they're going to tell you, oh, don't worry, we have it all in order. That's what you're going to hear. And on this side of the table, we're here to tell you, there might be a few things that could be tweaked so you can avoid some of this stuff. So,
go ahead, David.
I wanted you to say something before we shut down. It's a kingdom issue. So we've talked about families and money to families, but one of the things you taught me in your team, the round table, your group of people, is what we're talking about often transcends money to family to whatever. It's kingdom money. And at some point, maybe not tonight, but at some point, you have many tools to save on taxes, pass money to the kingdom now and later. And you mentioned one was to my client that has a significant monthly income once the property's sold, then it goes to the kingdom.
At the end of life.
End of life. But even now, there's tools, and you're not going to talk about it tonight about it. But I want you here to know these can be kingdom issues that transcend family.
Aren't they all, Pastor? When you talk about stewardship of our resources, let's close with that. One of the classes, it's the same one we call the final tithe. How about this as a group? If God entrusted you with these 3 properties and kids and everything, what about at the end of life just saying a final tithe, which is what we call the class? How about 90% goes to our kids, and that's okay. And 10% goes to church and charity. And oh, by the way, let me give all the IRA money to the charity. And now we've disinherited Washington, we've done some honorable giving, and we think about the fact that we've kind of tithed on everything that we ended with at the end of our days. So it wouldn't be uncommon for our estate plan to say 90% to kids and 10. We just had somebody that just a $1 million lid to their 3 kids. Everything after that goes to charity.
Yeah.
And it was a $70 million balance sheet.
I had a couple in the office today at 11 a.m. They have no children, very nice estate, and they're giving the 100% to 3 different charities, Pastor. 100%. It's about a $4 million estate. So it's really a wonderful stewardship discussion.
Ben, we need to understand what the Bible says about our relationship to money, and there's a lot in there, isn't there? How many topics, how many times is money referenced in the Bible? Hundreds. A lot. And so this is a unique chance, too, to look at the fact that we serve and we worship and we want the kingdom to be, perpetuated, too, and the gospel to continue to go on. So that 90-10 is a fun thing to think about in your review, too, and we can help choreograph that.
And it's a neat discussion that likely never happens with the attorney, does it? So this is just a little bit different approach that we take, and it's one of the reasons Converge is working so hard to bring this education into all the churches, is because this is many times one of the outtakes.
I think I'm going to do this if I could. Your son, forgive me again, what was your name? Could I just ask you a strange question out of the blue, put you on the spot? Would you be uncomfortable if mom left 90% to you and the kids and 10% to her favorite churches and charity? Most kids feel that way. It's stunning. We did like 13 or 14 classes this last group of Converge churches. There's been over $20 million left to the church that wouldn't have gone there if we hadn't done that. So part of our joy is also to encourage generosity while we're alive. Dave, you would appreciate Warp's sense of humor. Getting a gift from a warm hand is better than getting a gift from a cold one, is something we heard not long ago. So when you can do qualified charitable distributions now, and if you're selling an asset, give more while you're alive, it's a beautiful thing too. So in your review, we'll be helping you figure out end-of-life giving and maybe some tips on current giving if that's helpful.
Well, that's what this slide is for. So if any of you, if that sounds like you'd like to maybe take that step, because we're not going to push or prod, Jake and Chris and I have available times. As you can imagine, because we offer this at no charge, basically Converge is covering our time to make this available to you. And if you would like to take advantage of that and learn a little bit more, then take that yellow card, and we've got available time slots on the table right outside the door. You saw it when you came in. And if one of those times or dates works for you, just take the Post-it, slap it on the yellow card, and that's for us. You leave that in that white tray, and then we'll have Katie at the office kind of coordinate and tell you what to bring. It's very easy to begin, and that's for those that maybe want to get started and not wait another,
Could I close with one ask? Mm-hmm. There is this I've been waited long enough. I'm tired of being nudged by my spouse. I need it done tomorrow. That would be a 5. Or as I'm just learning about it, I want more information. It would be helpful. Our Achilles heel is really available time slots to continue to serve like that. So if you'd have kind of some content there on your readiness, and then grab a time slot, even if you think you might have to call Katie and change it. That's my way of just saying that baby step of just keep moving and get additional information.
That's right, because every week our available times are changing. We talked with Ben earlier. We're going to your sister church there in Crystal on Thursday night. I mean, Converge has us pretty busy, so we're constantly, our challenge is always our calendars. But tonight, that's what we got available as well.
Ben, are you comfortable with that? We're finishing at about 7:15, 7:20 here. We'll stay around and answer any additional questions, but are you okay with closing us out?
The last slide, no rush, Andy, but the last slide does have our pricing. We don't want there to be a pink elephant in the room. We just, but for people that do want some help, whether it's a will or a trust, maybe just a simple POA or a transfer, we do it all. And we have set prices, and we'll just leave that up in case any of you have questions on that.
Any closing thoughts, Pastor?
No, I hope you found this helpful. And I hope you learned some things. I hope you know some questions to ask now. That's the biggest thing is, I don't know, when we started this journey and started talking, with Chris, I was like, I didn't even know what the right question to ask was. And actually, if you're going away and you're saying, I've got more questions,
that's okay.
Then we succeeded tonight because you didn't have those questions when you came in here. And so I just really want to encourage you to move forward with this and to really to take charge. And in fact, even just sitting here today, I was just thinking about, there's a couple things I got to think about here. So anyway, this has been good. So
Ben, don't you think it's a new language, though? It does take time to get used to all of this stuff. So be patient with yourself. We'll move at whatever pace you want. And the thought is just keep going, keep communicating with your family. And it's a privilege to be here with you tonight.
It is. Thank you. Thank all of you. And Pastor, it's not easy for a pastor to give up the microphone to kind of, only in the sense that they don't know who's coming in. And to kind of turn that over, that's what we're talking about. And we don't take that lightly.
This is my third time, to your point, this is the third time I've gone through this material.
Still catch a little bit,
and
don't you?
I'm still catching.
That's good.
I'm
That's
still
good.
catching on this.
Continuous learning process. We'll stay around for some questions, and we'll go from there. I hope that was helpful. Thank you.
All right, let me pray for you.
Okay.
Lord Jesus, thank you for tonight. Thank you for the education. Thank you, God, that we can get an idea of what the lay of the land is when it comes to wills and trusts and living wills and all of these things. And Lord, help us to be good stewards of what you've entrusted us with, God, just for your kingdom and for the benefit of our families. And I just pray this all in your name.